like to talk about the issue of sologamy. Now, sologamy, as the name suggests, means the marriage of one to oneself, a person marrying themselves. Now, sologamy is a female-only phenomenon almost completely. I've browsed many, many websites and haven't been able to find a single instance where a man has married himself. It's all been women. And the article eventually I'm going to treat with today is about several women who have married themselves and a follow-up that Vice did a year after they initially interviewed these women. But first I just want to talk about sologamy as evidence that MGTOW is working. Okay? So the beautiful thing about men going their own way is that we aren't even having a conversation with women anymore. We're picking up our chips and we're leaving. The beauty of this strategy is that we win no matter what, because we enjoy a fulfilled life where we don't have to worry about our emotional or financial security, because we take care of ourselves. Interestingly enough, women, instead of just doing the same thing, opt to symbolize such a self-care by making marriage with themselves. And, some women will take out loans to do this. Now, why is this difference between women marrying themselves and men just respecting themselves enough to go their own way and not feeling the need to marry themselves? Why is this important? It's important because it exhibits a sterling example of the female need to be affirmed externally. So why go through the whole celebration of having this big marriage, taking all these photos, smiling in all these pictures and then posting them all to social media, except to gain external validation by others? There is no other reason. It's essentially a grab for external validation because the woman is, by her nature, by and large, externally validated and socially validated. And a woman knows that if she is no longer unable to land a man because men are in droves going their own way, she is forced to marry herself to maintain that sort of air of happiness. What this also demonstrates is the myth. It sort of invalidates the idea of the strong woman that don't need no man. Women may or may not actually need a man, but they certainly need that marriage. I think that they do need a man. I think this shows it. Now, of course, in the Vice article, all these women are going to claim that they're super happy, but if you look at the photos, I invite you to look at the sad, forlorn desperation and lonely void in the eyes of these women in these photos. And I'm not saying this with even a shred of pleasure. It's frankly sad to see these women this way. I'm a compassionate person. I take no pleasure in this, but it is the effect. MGTOW is the effective strategy, and this sologamy is, I think, the first real tangible evidence of MGTOW working. So MGTOW win either way. If women stop trying to chase them or are unable to chase them and get them into a marriage contract that is, by its own definition, a bad deal for men, men win by leaving it. If women give up on trying to get men to marry them and start marrying themselves, perpetuating the downward cycle of their own unhappiness, men are still separate from this, and so we still win. If women eventually en masse decide, they're so depressed at this point, they're so broken down by the absence of male love in their lives that they eventually decide to collectively shape up and, make numerous myriad concessions in society, and that all MGTOW could eventually get together and decide whether they were worth it or not altogether. If women are unwilling to make this concession, we're just going to see depression rates with women in this country continue to shoot upwards. Now, I'm very patient. I think MGTOW are incredibly patient. We're infinitely patient because we're happy doing our own thing. Women obviously are not. They're so unhappy they feel the need to marry themselves, and yet, as we'll see in the article, these same women are still open to a relationship. So, in the end, what we're seeing is the next step towards women being driven by emotional starvation, and the starvation of the male gaze, the starvation of male validation altogether, to start resorting to crazier and stupider tactics in a desperate bid for attention until they will eventually give up. Now I'm calling this right now. My intuition says, my rational conjecture says that, it maybe take 50 years or something, but eventually women will collectively give up this charade that things like sologamy are making them happy. They'll just give up. And they'll admit that they do need a man. Most of them. Obviously, not all women are like that, but most heterosexual women need a man for their emotional happiness. If you want to think about it energetically or esoterically, they are receptive in their very energy and need to be penetrated by a penetrative energy, the masculine energy. If they don't have that in their lives, they're going to wilt. En masse, they're going to wilt. Now again, I am not a misogynist. I do not hate women. And it brings me no pleasure to see women en masse suffer like this. But in the end, they have done it to themselves by disrespecting men, feminism, disrespecting and throwing all men under the bus, and just collectively disrespecting roles like that of the husband to such an extent that the men are in droves, collectively deciding this is a bad deal. Interaction with, on a deeper level, romantic pair bonding with and marriage with women is a raw deal. Men are walking away, and we will hold to our principles until such a time as women collectively shape up and bring us to bring that new sort of societal acknowledgement that they do need men and are willing to shape up and treat men with respect. At which point it will be up to men going their own way to have a discussion about whether or not we think even returning to them at all is worthy or not, like worth of our time or not. But that's a discussion for later. So this article again by Vice is called Women Who Married Themselves Talk About How It Feels by Hannah Ewens. Quote, last year Vice reported on the trend of sologamy, the practice of marrying yourself as a way of boosting or affirming your self-esteem. Reports were coming in of women from California to the UK, mostly in their 30s, taking the next step with themselves, saying, all right, I'll take your outmoded tradition, your patriarchal road to ruin, and I'll make it about myself in every single way. So, sologamy isn't recognized in the US or Europe. However, it might not be a legally binding union. While it might not be a legally binding union, it's part of a growing self-empowerment movement. The benefits are plentiful. No pressure to change your perfectly decent surname. No doing sex with all the same body again and again. No resentment over a lopsided chore schedule. It's all about real self-love, so you can see why people are into it. Sasha Kagan is a life coach who offers lessons on how to embrace what she calls the quirky alone lifestyle, a way of being for those who find themselves terminally single and just want to appreciate being alone until something perfect comes along romantically, end quote. Well, okay, quote, if ever, end quote. So again, that just sort of contradicts itself in a way. It's not completely self-contradictory, but it is already we get the hint that it's just the celebration of, trying to turn the perception of it being negative that they're single and alone into a positive, but only until such a time as a good man comes along, if ever. So back to the article. Quote, Kagan is an advocate of the self-wedding, which she views as a much-needed coming-of-age ritual that functions like a bat mitzvah or a quinceañera. She wrote a book about when self-weddings first started happening in Northern California 10 years ago, and she now runs a business off of the ritual, end quote. So basically she's just a greedy woman who's like profiting off the suffering of her own ilk. Quote, plenty of women who gotten end quote. I don't know that. Obviously, I don't know that. There's no need for speculation because the article destroys itself without me having to criticize it. Let's get back to it. Quote, plenty of women have gotten self-married directly as a result of her own ideas and direction. There are plenty of critics of the concept who largely think it's a narcissistic mess and the true embodiment of everything wrong with a society centered around self-importance and personal fulfillment. However, with the number of young people staying single on the up, it's more likely a move that will continue to appeal to some. But is it a solid idea? Does it actually make you feel any better, or does your face now just come up in Google Images every time someone searches woman marrying herself? I spoke to Kagan and other women who married themselves in the past year to see how they feel about their commitment retrospectively and how, or if it's really changed anything, end quote. Let's all make a prediction about what these women are going to say to a publication. Do we really think any of them are going to say, oh, it's miserable, I really regret marrying myself, that's why I agreed to be on this? No, of course not. They're all going to pretend like it's something that they enjoy. But let's amuse ourselves by it a little bit, shall we? Quote, Vice. During the honeymoon period, were you just totally in love with yourself? And then Miss Tanner, one of the three women that marries herself, said, yeah, I was. 6 months before the wedding, I moved into a studio and lived alone for the first time ever. It felt really lonely and weird about it. I felt really lonely and weird about it, but in the honeymoon period, there was a change. I was more. You know what? We're going to have a night in together. There was a sense of treating yourself and indulging. People ask if I wanted to get married, and I can say, actually, I'm already married to myself. You don't have to worry anymore. You're not waiting around for the one, because you already are the one. You found that person, end quote. So just another excuse to treat herself. But really, it's sort of the, she displays how societally pressured she is to get married here. So back to the article. And again, that kind of shows that it's not just woman's natural desire to be penetrated by love force. It's also, that she's being shamed by perhaps many women. The women, I think, will shame each other to an extent and kind of pressure themselves. So you can kind of understand why they would want to get married, just to get everyone off their back. So that's another reason this is happening. Blah, blah, blah. I'm really not going to take too much time with this article. Yeah, we just see these sad pictures. Look, it's not... you look at this woman, looking down at these flowers, trying to appear happy. Ugh. It's depressing stuff, I guess. It's just kind of sad. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, quote, can you see self-marriage? And she's talking to someone else, I think at this time, interviewing somebody else, but someone else who got self-married. Can you see self-marriage ever becoming totally normalized? Quote, I can. I know a lot of people who have self-married as part of a meditation, but not necessarily had anyone around to witness it. My decision to have people there is because I knew I would be more likely to take the commitment seriously, but that's just me. Very, very good friends can now hold me accountable from time to time. This year, people are already asking me to speak and write about it, so it's picking up here, and it's generally younger women. There's an acknowledgement that whether you're in a relationship or not, if you don't have a good relationship with yourself, your life is not as fulfilling. End quote. So, frankly, again, I'm only taking issue really with people who are actually like paying for marriages, like actually having big celebrations they have to plan, taking a bunch of pictures and stuff. Look, if a woman wants to go out into the middle of nowhere and affirm to herself that she's marrying herself, like symbolically, that's totally fine. That's not something, that is really that silly. It's just, it is what it is. If that makes her happy, then fine. That's good for her. I'm more critical of the big, sort of weird celebrations we're talking about. Yeah, so here's the final piece I wanted to read from the article. Quote, how does it affect your dating life? Well, some men understand and some men don't. It makes you put up with less. You're less prone to settling and more interested in self-respect and not settling for scraps, because basically not settling for scraps. A lot of women get trapped in believing that relationships are painful and involve going for people who don't give us what we want. When you marry yourself, you are basically creating a standard for what a relationship is, and you start training yourself to go for nicer people. If things go downhill, will you get divorced? No, she laughs. That's the greatest thing. The only way to divorce yourself is to kill yourself, otherwise you're in it. Let's say I neglect myself and become ill and I'm not sleeping properly, then I'm neglecting my self-marriage. One of my vows is to put my life ahead of my work. When I get into a situation where I'm being a workaholic and not taking care of myself, I'm not obeying the vow of my self-marriage. But that just means that I have to come back to it and not divorce myself. So final paragraph, I think that makes a lot of sense. Do you see it as a self-care thing? Yeah, I think it is on a very deep level. It marks a societal shift. A marriage was to celebrate becoming an adult, but now we live in a different world where people are staying single. A self-marriage is a coming-of-age ritual and it's really beautiful. To really commit to yourself is to say what your priorities are on a deep level. I think it's a step forward for women to really value themselves. Most people think it's really crazy, but I think it makes total sense. People are going to catch up with us in 50 years, and it will be totally normal, end quote. So interesting that she thinks that in 50 years, self-marriage will become very normal, and all women will be doing it, and they'll all love it, and it'll be great, and it'll make them all happy. I disagree. I think that in 50 years, women will recognize that they are kind of creatures that yearn for pair bonding in an emotional way, and will realize the absolute absurdity and failure of sologamy. So let's mark this right now. I'm calling the failure of sologamy. She's calling the success of sologamy. We'll see who's right. Take care, gentlemen.